You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place.
Hello, Michael.
Hello, Charlie.
How are you today?
I'm fabulous. How are you?
I am also doing well because we just actually recorded another episode right before this.
Yeah, it's been a pretty good day.
So I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw. You are listening to Arcane Carolinas.
I am your other co-host, multi-award-winning novelist, Michael G. Williams.
I don't know when this is going to air, but we'll share some fun news here very quickly as not to take up too much of your time before we get into it. Volume 3 of the Arcane Carolina book series. The first draft is about halfway done. Considering releasing that out of band, we've traditionally pushed the books out in the fall. Might do that earlier this year. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And figurine number 2 in our Critters Encrypted series is almost ready to begin distribution, which is going to be the Lizard Man.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So same as Nobby. Little... We've talked about this, like monster in my pocket or muscle, like that size, like 1 3/4 inch tall. He'll initially come in green. That will be the standard colorway, unlimited. And then we'll do like a fire orange.
Yeah.
I don't know. Fire lizards are cool.
Yeah, totally.
In fiction. Like,
Yeah.
You know. And then probably a black one as well.
Okay, cool. In April, we're going to be doing a talk at South Regional Library in Durham, North Carolina.
You will definitely be there.
Yes.
I am tentative.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I'll also be selling books and giving away Arcane Carolina stuff at Carolina Fear Fest in May.
Yep. Good stuff.
Yeah.
And then I've got, that's way off in the future. I'm not going to bore them with that.
We do actually here in January know the date for spooky season kickoff, but I will not say it.
Yeah. We already have our fall booked.
Yeah. We actually were recently talking to a school that wanted us to come talk to their library folks and do a talk in their library. And we had to schedule it for November.
All right. Big thanks to everybody that watched Lost Monster Files. Also, that was a really fun experience.
Yeah. Super cool. And it's weird in the funnest way to be like, oh, let's watch this TV show. That's Charlie.
Yeah, and if you're finding this podcast from Lost Monster Files, you're probably wondering, wow, he talks a lot more. That's the magic of editing.
I don't even remember what it was you said in one of the episodes, but I remember you said something in an episode and Michael and I both started laughing because we were both like, that's actual Charlie right there.
Authentic.
So good. So today, I'm going to interrupt myself. You know,
I don't even have to do anything. I'll see myself out.
We've done a bunch of episodes that were titled like, Do Not Go To Place.
Yes.
This one is titled Do Not Trespass at Salem Black River Church.
So you can go to the church, just don't trespass at it.
Maybe. I'm not 100% sure.
That is a really ominously named institution, by the way.
I know. And so
Salem Black River Church. People are dying to get into our service.
It's in, well, it is near the town of Maysville, South Carolina in Sumter County. We're going to start by talking about the history of Sumter County, if my notes decide to cooperate, which are going to
Visit
take a
our
second.
spooky Sunday school at Salem Black River.
It's like, and I'm not kidding when I say this, it's like you've read the first website I read about this.
Oh, wow.
Because it was kind of ridiculous. Kind of ridiculous. It was very ridiculous. Give me just a second. It is just outside of the town of Maysville, South Carolina, in Sumter County, South Carolina.
Salem Black River Church.
And it's called that because the Black River runs through that community.
Of Salem.
I don't even know if the community is called Salem. I'm not totally sure why it was called Salem Black River Church.
Because somebody was like, what is the most metal name we can name our church?
Maybe. They were hundreds of years ahead of their time. The largest and best...
Sunday. Awana on Wednesday nights.
Oh my God. Would it be... I don't know how I would feel about it if churches started having monster truck rallies.
We were pretty close on some of the mega churches.
Okay.
Like Righteous Gemstones.
Oh, yeah.
Redeemer!
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
I'm going to stop. We are like really treading the line here of possibly offending people. I am really treading the line here of possibly offending people.
Well, I'm not actively disagreeing.
And it's not my intent.
And suffice to say, this church is not like Righteous Gemstones at all. It is like the opposite.
Good.
The largest and best known indigenous people in the area where the story takes place were most likely a people known as the Wateree.
That is not the Salemites.
No. They were much like the Tuscarora. Their population was noted repeatedly as being large and that they were very culturally powerful in
There's
the
a
area.
river named after them.
There is. It's true. When the Spaniards made their ill-fated
Yes, I know
attempt-
it's true. I didn't just make that up. I wasn't.
No, I was just agreeing. It's not like I'm like, you lie all the time.
He's spitting facts.
Yeah, no, I was backing you up. I was talking to that guy who complains that we don't start the ghost story.
Why are they talking about other things?
We're improving. So,
Yes, and no, but. You graduated from yes and to no, but.
oh, there we go. Okay.
Improv, the lowest form of comedy.
God, it's so bad. Oh, see, I'm going to have made somebody mad by saying
Oh,
that.
we definitely just aggravated somebody.
Yeah, totally. Well,
Sorry.
life is going to go on.
Stop paying for lessons. They're not going to make you good.
Oh, man. It's just, you got to be a really special kind of performer. This population.
Yeah, so do clowns.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Now I've just burnt our bridges with our clown contingency.
It's just.
You know what? We're just burning it down today.
The audience shrinks by the second. So,
You know who else I don't like?
it's okay. I'm about to talk some trash about Spain.
España.
When the Spaniards made their various ill-fated efforts to colonize what's now South Carolina and North Carolina, they encountered the Wateree in present-day Rowan County, North Carolina, way north and west of where they eventually lived. The Spaniards' cartographer referred to them as the Gatari. The G... Yes. No. He spelled it Guatari. So
Yeah.
I'm... As far as I know, there's not like Middle Spanish, which is pronounced differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pronouncing that word the way that, to my limited understanding, it would be pronounced in modern Spanish,
Righteous.
which is Gatari.
Be excellent to each other.
Yes, they were the people that Bill and Ted came from.
Sorry.
I love the Bill and Ted movies. They also noted that as the name of their largest town. They were one of the tribes who simply killed all the Spanish soldiers that the Spaniards left behind and were just like, well, we're done dealing with that.
Spanish Expedition 6. Maybe
Yeah.
this time it'll work.
The Spaniards left them alone. It kept working. No, it worked for everybody who did that. I'm just going to say.
Spanish Expedition 7. This time we'll not stay as long.
In Jawara, they left one guy alive to go tell the Spaniards what had happened, but the Wateree were just like, nah, problem solved. That was the late 1500s. By the late 1600s, the English colonizers mentioned that they had relocated south into what is now South Carolina. And by 1700, they were on the banks of the Sumter River in South Carolina. But they were also noted as still having a large population and a significant cultural and diplomatic impact in the region. And they were ruled by two women who were co-chiefs who had unusually strong executive authority over their people compared to the other peoples around them. They had a very strong centralized government.
Yeah, because in a previous episode where we were talking about the Tuscarora, it seemed like a series of checks and balances, whereas this is not.
Yeah, and down to the point that half of the Tuscarora joined a war and half of them didn't because their chiefs said yes and no, respectively. The Wateree were ruled by two co-chiefs, women who had total executive authority over everything. This is possibly why they persisted for as long as they did, despite all the same things happening to them that happened to every other indigenous people in the region.
I am not making the case for totalitarian authority.
Yeah, I'm
That is not the case I'm going to make. But there's a reason that North Korea continues to exist. It's because when you have a hyper-centralized power, if you're able to hold on to it, you'll persist. And sometimes for better, most times for worse.
And if you have China and Russia backing up.
Right. But you get the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
Most of the times, it's not necessarily for the better.
Well, and it doesn't also often outlive the people who have established it.
Yeah.
And that's probably part of what was happening here also.
Yeah.
Because almost identically to the story of the Tuscarora peoples, the Wateree fought on the side of the English in the Tuscarora War, and then the English were only too happy to thank them with a whole bunch of goods and stuff like that. And then shortly after, they fought against the English in the Yamasee War, and
as was the style at the time.
And that was disastrous. That broke their power as a cohesive people, and though they retained their language and their national identity, they largely relocated and became part of the then growing Catawba Federation. We've talked a lot about how a lot of peoples, when they started to be wiped out, essentially just relocated to Catawba and joined the Catawba. The Catawba had become very welcoming of other peoples that this was happening to.
It's a way to survive.
Yeah. There was a guy named James Adair who is a huge figure from history, and he also probably deserves his own episode. He spent 40 years living among the indigenous people of what is now South Carolina and North Carolina. He noted that in the decade or so on either side of 1740, he heard 20 plus different languages actively spoken in daily life when he would spend time in the Catawba territory trading with them. So this was a huge, multilingual, very diverse culture, very diverse confederation that the Catawba had built.
I couldn't survive with that many languages. I can speak English and half Spanish.
And Adair could speak them.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. He was an Irishman who came to the colonies and then almost immediately simply went to live among the indigenous people and was just like, I'm out of here. He did that for most of the rest of his life. In 1775, he published a book titled, and I put in my notes, take a deep breath, The History of the American Indians, containing an account of their origin, language, manners, and other particulars sufficient to render it a complete Indian system with a new map of the country. Don't you know that looked like hell on an end cap at Barnes & Noble?
It certainly gets the point across.
It does. Well, now I know what this book is about. No mystery there. He wrote that book in part because he was trying to dispel a bunch of the nonsense racism that was going around about Native American peoples. He had lived among them for decades. He knew that a lot of stuff that was said about them was garbage, and he wanted to try to combat that. However, and I emphasize an Irishman who had just moved here was like, hey, maybe this stuff is too racist. When one of the colonists is looking around and is like, maybe this stuff is too racist, it tells you a lot about what's going on.
Yeah.
In part, I point that out because a huge portion of the history of the American Indians, containing an account of their origin, language, manners, and other particulars sufficient to render a complete Indian system with a new map of the country, is devoted to Adair's insistence in what was already a debunked but widely held belief, namely that the indigenous people of North America were descended from the lost tribes of Israel. That was a huge belief at the time.
Really?
Yeah. He was a very strong proponent of that belief.
So the book is not perfect.
Yeah. It is fascinating as a concept. I'm going to try not to deep dive into it, but there was a really interesting book written a few years ago about that particular phenomenon of belief, in which the author pointed out that there were a lot of people for whom that conveyed a sense of belonging and ownership in the New World. And it would allow European colonists to connect themselves to the Native American people here by saying, oh, but they're secretly the Jewish people. And so they're part of our religion too. So it's all tied up together and we're not the invaders.
Right.
But that's a really complicated question that I'm not going to dive into, except to say that it's also the kind of stuff that we saw from the fake story of the quote-unquote white Indians that we talked about with the Cherokee. There was a lot of attempts like that to try to turn the Native Americans into quote-unquote lost Europeans.
Right.
Yeah. It's really interesting, but it is not this topic. And I even put a note in for myself. It's not this topic, Michael. Move on. As late as 1744, there were still people who listed their national identity as Wateree and spoke the Wateree language, living and working in Catawba territory, and their identity was sufficiently solid that they were still being recorded as such in English legal records. But after that, they vanish from the record, and they're considered extinct now. Maysville, the town nearest the location of this legend, is a very small town. As of 2010's census, it only had about 700 people and was the birthplace and childhood home of Mary Jane McLeod Bethune, an extremely prominent feminist and civil rights activist in the late 19th and 20th centuries. And she definitely deserves her own episode because she is fascinating and awesome. Just noting that that is the place where she came from. There are actually several really well-known civil rights activists connected to Maysville. The legend as it is told. And I'm going to emphasize the as it is told part here. There is a particular phrase that has become part of the lexicon that my husband and I use after we saw somebody say it on Nextdoor, and that is, I saw where they were saying.
I love that.
And this is one of those, I saw where they were saying.
Can I tell you about some Nextdoor stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Nextdoor is a frequent and highly prized topic of conversation in my household.
This person posted the most disturbing post.
Oh.
All they posted was, I don't feel safe.
Oh.
So immediately everybody's, oh my God, we need to locate where this person is. Should we do a safety check? Should we do? People called 911 and were like, hey, I need a health and wellness check, like on this residence.
Yeah.
This person was aggravated at a firefighter. The fire department was doing a controlled burn.
Who gets aggravated with the fire department?
This is what happens. The fire department was doing a controlled burn.
Yeah.
This person said, hey, you can't be lighting that on fire. They said, we actually have to keep this area safe.
Who are you going to call about it?
Right. And they're like, we actually have to. It's part of, it's on the schedule to prevent wildfires in this area. This is what we do, blah, 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 blah. It's rain in the forecast. Like, we're good. Like, we planned for this. They didn't like that. So because they couldn't call anybody, because who are you going to call, they decided to raise a ruckus by going on Nextdoor and posting the most alarming thing. And to the credit of the people on Nextdoor, they did the right thing and checked in on this person and had the police check on this person and just blew up into this whole like, well, the police came to my house and didn't do nothing either.
Oh my God.
Like,
I feel like that's got to be illegal. Like there's some sort of malicious crisis creation.
Right? Nextdoor is the most unhinged social media.
Oh. Nextdoor is the Wild West of social media. I hate Twitter. I don't use Twitter anymore. Right. We officially abandoned Twitter. There are a lot of really awful sites out there, a lot of really terrible social media platforms that are run and owned by terrible people to advance terrible purposes. And Nextdoor might be even more dangerous than all of that.
Who does that?
Yeah. That said, Nextdoor is also a great place to learn about a specific person in Durham who is going to be a topic for a future episode.
Yeah.
Got to value it for that.
Yep. I learned about that person from Reddit.
Yeah.
And then we talked about it. You're like, oh, yeah, they talk about that person on my Nextdoor.
Yeah. And then my husband was like, y'all should do an episode about her. And I was like, oh, we should.
We should.
This is all just out there. We don't have to give any opinions.
It's all public record and there's court cases.
Yeah. It's all very public at this point. But also, there is somebody on Nextdoor in Durham who occasionally posts really weirdly cryptic statements saying that they are certain that there are cryptids in Durham.
We did a Patreon on one of those.
Yeah. And this person every now and then posts, and there will be a little engagement around it, and they'll delete their post. So I have not pursued anything that they have posted, but they are very certain that there's stuff out there.
We did talk about a four-legged canine-like thing for a Patreon episode once.
Yeah. Man dog that somebody saw in Durham. So a lot of this is on the same level.
Yeah.
Like many of the mega haunted sites that we have talked about, this isn't really one story. It's like a quarter of 15 different stories in a trench coat.
Yep.
I saw where they were saying, basically, that a huge and very old abandoned church stands in the woods outside Maysville, South Carolina.
Oh, it's abandoned, so you can't go there.
The legend, I emphasize legend there, says that the church has sat unused for many years. And supposedly, one of the reverends who led the church when it was an active church watched his entire family die in a plague, and it drove him mad.
The mad parishioner.
Yes. After that, he would wander the grounds at night muttering to himself and shouting at strangers to leave him be. And it is even said in some versions of this legend that the preacher in question abandoned his calling and cursed the place and all who venture onto it. These days, visitors say that they experience all kinds of bad stuff at this location. On the low end of experiences, people say that they'll go and they will hear giggling disembodied children dash past.
That's the low end?
That's the low end.
I would think the low end would be like, I got the heebie-jeebies.
No, the low end is giggling disembodied children.
All right, that's a pretty high bar.
And a feeling of constantly being watched the moment that they step onto the property. But it gets worse. There are also supposedly 2 graveyards on the premises, one for members of the church and members of the community, and another farther back from that exclusively for preachers who led the church. They say that the second graveyard is totally overgrown and hedged in literally by trees and underbrush, and that it is inaccessible. At least it's not safely accessible. But people who go to the edge of it say that they can hear whispered conversations and the screams of unseen women from within that second graveyard.
Like Beatles fans in the 60s screams or distressed screams?
I think murder victim screams.
Okay.
Yeah. Not Beatles fans, unless you're a murdered Beatles fan, which probably has
I
happened.
just think there's a difference. We should differentiate our screams.
Definitely. They also report seeing the shadow of a hulking figure watching them from the tree line wherever they go.
Grave Squatch.
Grave Squatch. Oh my God. At least one paranormal investigator said in 2013 that every time his team visited the site, their batteries would run down, phones, flashlights, cameras, everything. And that the one time he saw the hulking shadow before his flashlight died and he turned his flashlight on it, the shape vanished. There are also people who say that they hear the weeping of a child and they see a disconsolate boy sitting on the ground near the entrance to the cemetery. And some say that they see the spirit of the priest wandering the grounds and shouting at anyone he encounters before disappearing before their eyes. It is also said, well, that word is carrying a lot of water in this episode, that there is a shack behind the church with its windows busted out and creeping vines taking over, and that people will see lights from inside that shack even though no one lives or works there anymore. It is sometimes claimed that's the parsonage. Others say that shack is the home of whatever figure is that hulking shape lurking at the edge of their vision. And on top of everything, there are rumors of satanic rituals taking place inside the abandoned sanctuary. All of this adds up to give it a kind of a Hellmouth vibe, where enough bad and dangerous and unsettling stuff is altogether too easy to encounter, that originally this was titled Do Not Go to Salem Black River Church. But is it real? No. I am firmly in go there for living history camp.
Okay.
But I am also in go there when they're having services, which they still do, and which are open to the public.
Do they really?
They do. This is not a place to trespass. This is a church that has a congregation.
Go for the bake sale. Go for the potluck.
I am firmly in stay away at any other time camp because this is an active church with an actual congregation and they have a ton of security cameras because of this legend.
I'm going to jump in here.
Yeah.
At the end of my street, you know where I live.
Yeah.
At the end of my street, there is an old church. It is boarded up with metal bars. The windows are covered. There is a cemetery. It is kept. The grass gets cut, whatever. Yeah. There's signs everywhere. No trespassing, under video surveillance. There is a shack.
Yeah.
Off on the edge of the woods that had probably at one point been used for caretakers' tools and stuff, but has since grown into disrepair. There's nothing in it. But yes, I'm admitting that I've walked around on this. But They do the same thing where they don't have Sunday service there, but they will once or twice a year have a service there. And they had a big upkeep day, I'll say, 6 months ago. It's trim brand, because after the hurricane came through, there was lots of stuff down.
Sure. Yeah.
So they had a big cleanup day. And I happened to be walking in the woods. There's a trail that runs alongside their property. I happened to be walking in the woods, and I saw there was people there. So I just availed myself of the opportunity.
Yeah.
And was like, hey, I see the doors are open. Oh, you got pews in there. I thought this was abandoned. And they're like, no, we have a service like twice a year.
Yeah.
We maintain the cemetery. We've moved elsewhere, but we still come back here sometimes. And so this is really hitting close to home. This is amazing.
I grew up in the mountains in a little knot town, not that terribly far from Asheville, but also not terribly close. At the bottom of my parents' driveway, the house was up on one end of a ridge. And the driveway was a long gravel road down that end of the ridge to the rest of the road level. At the bottom of that driveway was a church that had also at one point been the Union Chapel, which is a term for a specific kind of church where a community where not everybody was the same religion or denomination would come together and pool their resources, build a religious structure, and then they just took turns using it. Everybody got to use it.
There's one of those in Chapel Hill.
Yeah. The Union Chapel at the bottom of the driveway had also been the one-room school that was a public school for a long time. It was the school that my grandmother went to. By the time I was a kid, it was no longer in use as a school, obviously, and it was no longer in use every Sunday as a church, but there was still a board of directors. There was a nonprofit that held the property in trust, and they would twice a year open it up. One was for a family reunion, and one was the homecoming. Every year they'd have a homecoming, and they'd do a church service and a big lunch, and anybody who wanted to could come, and it was all preserved for that purpose. It's exactly like that, yeah.
It's interesting. Salem Black River Church.
Right.
Come to our biannual bake sale. First starts at 9. Leave the parking spots in the front for the elderly, please.
Right, for real. Don't hog those parking spaces.
Also, please be out 1 hour after service.
Don't hang around. This structure is not abandoned. It is historically very important, and it is also actively in use and important to its community. So don't just stay away to avoid the giggling disembodied children. Show respect to a place that is still important to people. One of South Carolina's oldest churches, this church is. It sits on Highway 527, about a mile from Maysville.
1 mile from Maysville along Highway 527. Visit us at www.
They actually have a Facebook page. So that was part of my verifying that it's still in use. The land that it sits on was donated by a militia captain from colonial days named David Anderson, who was an English veteran of the Cherokee War. In 1753, Anderson received a land grant from the Crown for 300 acres in what is now Sumter County, and he gave some of that land for the construction of a log meeting house for use by other Scots-Irish Presbyterians living in the community. By 1768, the congregation had grown enough that they tore down the original log structure and they built a wood frame chapel facing the road. It was the road that ran from King Street to Camden at the time, so it was a pretty important road in that community. Remember Bannister Tarleton?
Yes.
Yeah. The big foppish guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. The English officer who ran headlong into the Cowpens battle and lost?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun making fun of him.
Oh, for real. So did I. One of my favorite parts of that Lost episode, the Lost original recording, is that I had a projector screen at a PowerPoint, and I could show people the portrait of Bannister Tarleton, which is so off the charts. I loved it. So at any rate, at an earlier point in the Revolutionary War, he had his soldiers encamped around this church. And when he left, he did not burn it down, despite that being his habit. His usual habit was camp around a church important to the community as a place that they won't attack.
Right.
And then when we leave, we burn it. But he didn't. In 1802, the congregation again tore down the wood frame structure.
I'm tired of burning. I don't want to burn anything today. I'm Bannister Tarleton.
He had a battle to lose. He didn't have time to start fires.
Carry on. The only church not burnt by Bannister Tarleton.
I don't know if it's the only, but it is one of few, to be honest.
He was too scared.
He might have been. They tore that down in 1802 and replaced it with a larger one. And the new one is the one that was called Salem Black River Church, which probably already was its name, but I couldn't really figure that out. The new structure was made of brick and was in fact one of the first, if not the first, brick churches in South Carolina.
Wolf-proof.
Wolf-proof. Very wolf-proof. Big Bad Wolf couldn't get in there.
Can't blow it down.
Even if he wanted to.
Nope.
And as such, that road, Highway 527, became known as Brick Church Road, and that is its name to this day. The address for this place is Brick Church Road, Maysville.
There you go. Look it up.
Yeah.
Go to one of their services. Don't trespass.
In 1846, this third brick structure was also torn down and replaced, but this time with a very large and impressive Greek Revival style church, meaning it has a big front porch, it's got big columns, it's multiple stories, it's got a peaked roof, the whole 9 yards. Kind of looks like the Parthenon. They used a bunch of the bricks from the original in the course of constructing this one.
Cool.
Yeah. But they also made bricks on site for that construction.
I don't think people necessarily appreciate how much of the United States brickwork actually comes from the Carolinas.
Oh, yeah.
It's a crazy high percentage.
Yeah, totally.
I wrote about that in one of the old zines.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I found a brick from Ohio, and I was like, what are we doing with this Ohio brick?
Man, Ohio bricks do not pass muster.
No.
Take that, Arcane, Ohio. Instagram account from 1,000,000 years ago. So
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I think about that probably more than I should. So
it was bold.
It was very bold. That's what you get. Yeah, we stole your airplanes too. As such, there were a ton of plantations in this area, and this was a hugely important agricultural area. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, this is one of the few areas where plantations, even after the end of slavery, continued.
Okay.
A lot of formerly enslaved people simply worked for wages as part of the same business.
Yeah.
But as a result of that, when the church was built in 1846, it had a really large, what was called a slave galley, a balcony over the sanctuary. Enslaved people were only allowed to go into that part of the church. It's 3 sides of the sanctuary. It is both sides and the back. It is enormous when you look at photographs of the interior of this. There were a lot of enslaved people who were made to attend this church, and they were probably also the people making the bricks to build the church, which is messed up. It's just a little messed up twist on a really messed up situation to begin with.
Worst practices.
Yes. In 1867, following their emancipation and the end of the Civil War, as this area, like many, tried to sort out the shifting dynamics of politics and economics and civil rights, the African-American members of the congregation formally withdrew and started a nearby church called Goodwill Presbyterian Church. The Presbyterian denomination, the Presbyterian Church, continued to support them, worked with them, no problem there. The same congregation that started the Goodwill Presbyterian Church started the Goodwill Parochial School, which is for African-American children in the community. It was a very important school. It was very influential, especially in other Black Presbyterian churches and the models that they followed elsewhere.
The best practices?
It was best practices. And the Presbyterian Church financially supported that school up until the 1930s. So they actually tried to make sure that this was successful and that these people had opportunity, which I think is very admirable.
It is admirable. I like that. And I also had an idea. We should start a spin-off podcast where we talk about the most ridiculously poorly run companies and just call it worst practices.
I don't know when we would record that.
I don't know when we would either, but
there's a great idea there.
Like when DuPont would have people be like, oh, I'm washing my hands in lead to show you that it's safe.
When people file like malicious patents for something they haven't actually figured out, but they're like, I'm going to sue somebody who does. I'm doing that now with this.
with worst practices.
We're claiming worst practices.
All right, good.
Yeah, and we're just going to sue anybody who goes and does it. That's not true. I don't know. Maybe it is true. I don't know. We did have to file trademark paperwork because somebody threatened to start using our logo on merchandise.
Yeah.
Without our permission. So that's how we ended up having a lot of formal business paperwork. But that kind of stuff happens. It's really weird. Later in the 20th century, that school, the Goodwill Parochial School, was incorporated into the larger school system. And those structures are all still standing and preserved.
Awesome.
Yeah. That shack behind the church.
Yeah.
That is not some abandoned windowless building that a
Somebody
hulking
actually
figure lives in or anything.
Yeah.
That is what is referred to as the session house.
Okay.
At the time, Presbyterian churches would have a session house that was a separate structure. And the session house is where they did all their business meetings.
I like that.
The sanctuary is reserved for
like
services.
that. I think that's, that's
business
a good move.
meetings happen elsewhere.
You don't have to flip any tables that way.
It is noted in a story that ran as a 2-part article in 2015 in the Darlington News and Press by Bill Seegers. He is a renowned local expert on historic churches in particular. He's written books about this. In his discussion of the session house, he notes that it is also where the church conducted trials of members who were too sinful or broke the rules.
We're back to worst practices.
Back to worst practices, just so you know.
Dang
Just
it.
so you know.
I was so proud of them for separating the business from the faith. I really thought there was something there for a second, but now it just turns out they're flogging people or whatever.
I don't know.
At least
they
emotionally.
They might have just been churching people. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Just. Salem Black River Church was, it is worth noting.
Come for the bake sale, stay for the waterboarding hut.
Oh, God.
I'm going to be in the waterboarding hut. I think I'm like number 1 on the list now.
If I ever go to Maysville, we're in trouble.
I have a little most wanted poster.
They can only hang it up outside the church, though.
Outside the shack, not the church. It's not allowed at the church. It's got to hang on the shack. Right. Those little wanted things in the post office. Remember those?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Salem Black River Church was the home church of James McBridge Dabbs, who...
These names!
He was one of the most progressive Southern white people throughout the first half of the 20th century. He was a massively important writer and public speaker in favor of desegregation and civil rights.
So he's a good guy.
He was. MLK Jr. referenced Dabbs by name in his letter from Birmingham jail, for instance, as a white person that he could tell got it. Where it came to civil rights and the effects of segregation. So he was somebody who was very highly respected, and he was also very influential within the Presbyterian Church. He was a leader in the largest progressive organization within the Presbyterian Church at the time, and he was someone who based his positions and beliefs in concepts of community and the Southern heritage, which was actually the name of one of his books, because he saw racists positioning their arguments as being rooted in this idea of heritage. And he was like, no, I'm going to take that language, and I'm going to say that our heritage is to be better people. He's a really interesting figure.
Yeah.
This was his home church throughout his life. He, in 1962, gave a large collection of books from his personal library to Salem Black River Church. And today, the session house is the home to that library of books.
I still don't like the session house. I don't care that it has nice books. I don't like that interrogations happen in it.
They haven't happened there in a long time, is my guess. Also, that graveyard is maintained and is entirely accessible beyond a gorgeous wrought iron gate and fence. And the very old graves there are fascinating to look at. There is a second structure, which may be what people think is a shack, but Seegers pointed out in his articles, that is a working outhouse from the early days of the church.
Oh, fun.
And as he put it, you can take 5 friends with you when you go because it's got 6 holes.
Wow.
Which I can say because it's in the newspaper.
Yeah. Luxurious.
Yeah. Salem Black River Church does up close look like it's in a state of disrepair, and that's because it is, because it's almost 200 years old.
Sure.
It's been through every hurricane that has ever happened, and it has had damage done to it. It's been through earthquakes. It's been through all kinds of stuff. But there is an ongoing project of the current congregation to restore the church brick by brick, and they are literally just have experts climb a ladder and fix a square foot of the structure, and they're done. As of 2015, they had about 30 people in their congregation, and as of last year, they had an active Facebook page, and they do services twice a month. they're still in business and we should respect what they do. Some people from the local Air Force Base tried to vandalize the place and they got caught immediately because there are a lot of security cameras. And that's the story. Don't trespass in this place.
Thank you, Michael. That was a good one.
Well, thanks for listening. And now we have to give up the room. Bye.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. For more episodes, behind-the-scenes information, and links to our social media, check out www.arcanecarolinas.com, where you can also buy the Arcane Carolinas book.
And if you like award-winning horror and science fiction, check out my books at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. And if you have story suggestions, comments, or questions, email us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.
I think of so many inappropriate jokes. I'm not going to do it.
Okay. I'll cut him. I'll cut him.
I'll cut him.
I like how I'm just like,
It's fine.
You know.
Go, get it out. Nope, I'm going to save it.
I'm Roberto from the robot from Futurama. Dude, stabbing. I don't remember his name now. My web browser is being a pain. I'm going to keep all of this in the episode. If Freddie Prinze Jr. can get away with it, then so can Nicolas Cage. Namely, that the indigenous people of North Carolina,